I have one question. My question is about you didn't look at the heterogeneity effect of the program. I think here you try to explain why the program works by looking at the impact of intervention of the food, something like that. But it will be good for them because we know that if people have the money, they will buy the food. But what I think is what to look at is maybe if the program works for mother who have some education, for mother who are single, try to understand why program work, not just focus on intermediate outcome like food. I do understand that is important, but try to single mother, how many people spend on the farm. Think to understand why program work. Think about what is the assumption underpinning the intervention. That will help to explain why program work. And the second comment here is about you have a different treatment arm, and what also to look at is what is the cost. Try to do cost effectiveness analysis to see what is the most effective arm, something like that, because those intervention is very costly. Yes, that's right to comment.
Short question here. Any impact on labor supply? I was thinking especially on the lump sum transfer. Easy idea. I get money for free, I work less. You have any evidence on that?
I have two actually that I'll add, and they're wildly different. So, tying back to our first 3ie-IFPRI seminar that David gave, he presented on giving grants to women in Sri Lanka, female entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka, and you see this bump at first, and then as the surveys go on, it dissipates and goes away. And I'm curious as to whether the grants were really being given to the household or to the woman. I mean, because in a sense, if they're being given to the women, you've got a wildly different answer to the question that David was asking, although it's a little bit different. In that you're looking at consumption versus income, or business income in that case. And then the second question is, it strikes me that it would be you've got about a 14, 15-month program here, and it strikes me that if I'm 1 year old and my household is hit by this program, it's going to be very different impacts than if I'm 4 years old during that period. And I'm wondering how much you've looked at the heterogeneity by. I'm not as interested as, interestingly, I know you've done gender, but have you done age cohorts? It seems to me that would be particularly important in this case. That's enough. You can go ahead. We've waited our 7 seconds. So.
3 hours later. Okay, so no, thank you for the questions and the comments. Those are good food for thought, and some of it, I mean, obviously, we have thoughts. There's a few new ideas that I liked. I mean, so I'll just, I guess, go a bit chaotic and try to answer some of the questions. So in terms of, I mean, I think you're right in terms of, basically, I fully agree with your sort of the way you think about what are the key problems and what exactly is driving the things. I think at the, so because this is part of a long research and we have been looking at a lot of other types of indicators, I think part of it it has helped us convince us less about why some things may have worked in the field and during the intervention. But in terms of whether we're really capturing something beyond income, I guess some of the results, it's hard to argue that are driven by income. And I mean, specifically, a lot of the questions we have on stimulation practices. Those are not things that you would sort of buy one time. So in terms of reading and playing with the kids. So it's I mean, even if you sort of argue that you bought a book and you still have it, and maybe that's why you read, but the habit of reading, I think it's in itself, it's not just having the book. And your question on isolating impacts, it's so the intervention, the design was really focused to understand kind of the big question. I think the big research question of the pilot is really about cash transfers in a CCT setting versus what happens when you actually push households to get into an income generation capacity. I mean, that was sort of the core question, and that's why the design is in such a way that sort of the three treatment arms play a little bit with us. So the ECD, in a way, it's something that's relevant, and when it emerges as a really important topic. But I think it's because of that original kind of core design. I think it's by definition it's hard to get to this isolating of the effects, which I fully agree. I mean, it is frustrating. I mean, especially from somebody like me who has a chance to sort of show up in a ministry and some country and I get asked, okay, what do we do? Do we give cash, or do we build a better school, hire teachers? And like, well, you can do all of those things, So I do think, but I also think a lot of the kind of the emerging research or CCT, at least in the CCT type of world, kind of the new generation of evaluation is sort of really thinking about those things seriously. I mean, the impact of different amounts of money and whether you give it to girls or to the adults, and so I think we're moving there. I mean, I think there's so much we can actually kind of nail down in these things. But I also do like a lot of your comments on long-term impacts, because I think in some ways that's the whole point of even why Progress has started is thinking about those kids 20 years later. And as you said, I mean, a lot of work is slowly emerging now that it's been 10, 15 years. So I'm equally excited to sort of kind of see what seems to be emerging. We are planning to actually keep going back in this setting. So it's I mean, probably talking about 10 years or so. But sort of the idea is to follow those kids and see how they kind of ended up in the labor market. Now, the other thing we're doing, which is not related to the paper, so I work a lot in Peru as well, and there's a new ministry who managed to sort of get in all the big flagship programs, development programs, the cash transfer, early childhood, etc. And they're asking us that question, like, how do we actually sort of design things that can evaluate not only each individual piece, but actually complementarities across, and within each, how do we sort of do variations of interventions to get to exactly that point, so that in 2-4 years they can actually sort of push their own designs and how those programs evolve. So we looked at unintended consequences in terms of different things. I mean, there's a piece we're working on right now that it's sort of it's my way of saying I won't give too precise answers to some of the questions, but basically we are looking specifically this issue of what happened on the income generation and what happens to the adults and the women, and I mean, if you can kind of the preview of the only slide that shows sort of differential impact, basically we do find that we find a couple of interesting things. Basically the lump sum arm was the one that was the most successful, and intuitively it's the one it was cash, develop business, and that has sustained both incomes and consumption as I showed. The training was successful, but not as much, partly because this was rural area in the middle of nowhere, so basically giving you a skill may not be enough. Not sufficient to sort of allow you to kind of explore that to the potential. And I think this is what sort of an early story is sort of coming up from that. But having said that, we have a piece that we also look at the impact of the program and shocks, which basically, and risk management, which was really kind of at the core of, again, of the intervention, given that this is a drought region. And we're finding that the two-income generation treatment arms fully protects households from new shocks, which was sort of a, it's another sort of a, kind of a, it's sort of impressive in the sense, thinking about 2 years after this ended, they still get the protection. So there's a lot there that we're sort of exploring and understanding kind of those linkages with the income generation and et cetera. And that sort of gets back to some of the question about the labor market and about, you know, whether some of the labor supply was affected. In fact, those who got the lump sum are more likely to be working, and they have, you know, more likely to have business. I mean, just by design, etc. Now, in terms of differential results, I mean, we've looked at gender, we've looked at age. We have an earlier version of the paper, and there we actually we're showing that the slightly older kids actually seem to be responding. They have higher impacts to the intervention. In this version, we decided to get it. We were not sure how much of that was driven by some of our concerns with the way the tests are. So the tests are done. So there's nothing wrong the way we collected the data or the tests, but because of the low levels of cognitive, etc., we did have a lot of issues of censoring, etc., and that sort of, I think, merges. So when we start splitting samples, I think it's sort of not obvious whether there's a difference, because actually the older kids are picking up because they're, you know, they're older by design. They are asked more questions by design. You know, they get more complex sort of questions. So, you know, we don't have a good story. So I mean, maybe the, you know, maybe the effect is there, but there is that interesting result. So it's sort of it's another way. If you really want to push it, you can sort of say that there is some catch up. So if, you know, actually the effect doesn't do much for the younger kids, but it actually older kids do catch up because. But I'll leave it with some sort of my own sort of a grain of salt. We actually, and then there was a question about whether we have more play with the consumption, and there we actually do have some child-specific questions about consumption. Actually, what the kids did eat, and I don't think we show them in this version of the paper, but I mean, basically we find a lot of impact on the kids. We actually that the same kids that we showed the result, there's impact on their diet. And then sort of similar in the question about heterogeneity. I mean, I mean, I think, you know, there's so much you can push heterogeneity beyond the design. So I mean, I think it's interesting to look at it, and helps you think about some of the potential stories. So we're doing some of that, I guess. And I guess the last point was about cost effectiveness. I fully agree. I mean, it's on the list of things to do a bit more carefully, but part of it, I think, is also this idea, this point of sort of, you know, depending on which round you go, you can basically need to update those costs and benefits, because you're going to be finding, you know, like whether things were faded out or persistent. So I mean, it's an interesting question itself. How, you know, how do you sort of organize that exercise? I mean, just to give you a sense of magnitude of how big these effects. I mean, they're actually similar with effects of studies, you know, in Argentina or in Ecuador that Norbert has been working on. So when we look at sort of the same cohort of kids and the same indicators across different countries, just to get a sense, we basically find similar magnitudes, probably 0.2 or so standard deviation in some of the language tests, etc. And the other thing, I think I remember right, some of the impacts sort of correspond to, it's an equivalent to having a mother who's about 1.5 years more educated. We also try to get, you know, standard deviations always sort of are obscure to me, even when I present them. But it's sort of, these are the types of things we try to do to get a sense of how big these results. And an earlier is that I remember but we also don't present it, is I think basically this is corresponds to a catch-up of 3-4 months after 9 months, which is, I mean, it's sort of it's a big effect after 9 months and not 3 months less delayed. But again, all of those are, you know, within the kind of, with a big grain of salt in terms of how you get to those. So I think hopefully I covered most of the comments.
Great. Go ahead.
Hi, I had a couple questions. One on contamination. I had a friend that was doing work on Nicaragua with the RED program, and I believe it was around the same time period. So I was wondering if you could speak to if there was any overlap. And then two, on external validity. Since you're saying it's so rural, and the your main result, or the arm that seems to last the longest, is the one where there's a business model and you're injecting cash into that. Are there a lot of business opportunities here? I mean, could you really expand this program and expect people to be able to become a nation of seamstresses or something like that? How might this work in a bigger context? Thank you.
Yeah, should we take a few more?
I enjoyed your paper. I wonder if you're familiar with the Hawthorne effect, where treatment groups actually perform better just because they're getting more attention, and if it would be of value to cross over your communities at some point in the future and treat the control communities and control the treated communities and see how much the attention effect contributed to your impact. And then secondly, did you detect any antipathy or jealousy in the control communities because they weren't getting the cash transfers even though they were technically part of the study?
More questions?
So contamination was not an issue. The RED was not in those municipalities when this pilot happened. So that was not a big deal. I mean, on external validity, I mean, that's, you know, it's a good point. I mean, what do you say to that question? Let's think. I mean, I think it's. I would probably feel almost comfortable saying that rural communities in Central America probably seem to be similar in some of those things. But yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's a fair comment. I mean, those. It's true that these are rural, extreme poor communities. So where the municipality head is don't think of kind of a Bethesda or it's like very there's not beyond subsistence. Basically, the key activities is subsistence farming, seasonal migration, and then there are a sufficient number of businesses, and they're all kind of on kind of consumption related things. They're kind of corner stores and carpenters and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I'm not to the extent that you sort of yeah. I guess I would leave it there. But I guess the Hawthorne effect, so as I mentioned earlier, we're doing another pilot where, and in this new pilot we actually randomize over the whole population. So we do have some of the control communities that are actually receiving the new interventions. So I mean, I have to think a little bit more carefully whether that can be useful to get to that. But but linked to your other question on antipathy, I mean, basically we did a lot of qualitative work and we spoke to a lot of beneficiaries and people in the control and kind of the attitudes to the intervention. It was basically in the treatment, the only thing that was not really clear in some ways was kind of the larger part of the targeting. So people didn't quite understood why why their community received it. I mean, they had a reason, but it was different across different people. So some people thought it was, you know, the Sandinista government. Others thought it was their mayor. Others thought it was, you know, they just were lucky. But even with those answers in both control and treatment, there was not a sense of sort of being upset about it. Within the treatment community, as I mentioned, the lottery was really a fantastic tool of transparency because, you know, I would worry if I was presented a design where you sort of randomly allocate and then you realize I'm upset because, you know, your local leader gave the lump sum intervention to the family or whatever. And so this was a lottery in all the community, and it worked really well. And in fact, we had questions to understand that a little bit, how it worked and how fair and how transparent it was. And that's basically came out like with kind of flying colors. The people in the control community, the typical answer was that basically, you know, sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. You know, it's like, and some reference to, you know, God will bring it next year maybe. So it's what I mean, but in again, in not any particular kind of a sense of being upset about it.
Go ahead. Sure.
When you went in, you know, with these cash transfers, what exactly did you tell them about the duration of the program and the, you know, like how long it would last and what they should do with the money? And, you know, was there kind of deliberate attempt to say, look, it's a, you know, short-term thing and we're going to stop? Do you know, or was it that, well, we'll see, and, you know, because that can make a difference, right? It shapes expectations, and especially if effects persist, then expectations can drive it.
No, so there was, I mean, I didn't say anything to anybody about that, but what the ministry told everybody from the beginning, that this was a 1-year program, and it would end. And I think that was understood. I mean, kind of in our qualitative work is very clear. That you know, everybody wishes it doesn't, etc. But they understood it's ending, and it was.
Eduardo has one last.
Sorry, so in the lump sum treatment, do people actually, I mean, do you make sure that people actually invest in businesses? And if they do invest in businesses, what kind of investments do they do? Like agricultural, non-agricultural?
Yeah, so I showed up in every household and made sure that they were doing no. So there was the conditionality for that additional lump sum was that they needed to develop a business plan, and the ministry had to approve it. And the business plan was done by giving them some technical assistance by local NGOs who had experience in different types of activities. And the only other requirement was that it could not be on farming, on agriculture. So it had to be something that diversified income sources. With the logic that since drought was the big thing that was affecting incomes, they wanted to test whether helping households diversify would actually improve their kind of their incomes and
So you've shown us an intent to treat effect then on the lump sum. What percentage of these households actually set up businesses?
I think so I think 97, 90. I think
Oh, really? Almost all of them
everybody started.
started a business.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just thinking in terms of, you know, it could there. Yeah, I know. I was thinking that maybe you have a much lower percentage, and so some of those were, you know, 2 years on, very successful, you know, and so the actual average treatment effect on those who continued
So
would
it's
be
driven
much higher. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, we're trying to understand the success stories a little bit. What does it mean, etc. But yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you all for coming. Our next 3IE, and thank you, Renos and Shireen, for this really stimulating discussion. Well, our next 3IE-IFPRI seminar will be October 18th, and we're working out travel schedules so that we have a speaker. So we will have a speaker. We're just working on travel schedules to figure out who it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.